Please tell us more about ADB's involvement in the process of supporting government on this national vaccine plan of Georgia.
Thanks. It's great to be with you. ADB's been supporting the government, the working group that developed the National Vaccination Deployment Plan, providing international expertise on various issues that are important for having a substantial and credible vaccination plan. Plan covers logistics, regulatory aspects, legal aspects. It provides for a public information plan, training, and looks carefully at the 9 of the major available vaccines, including some of the big names that your viewers would be familiar with, like AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer. So this is really important to have this plan. It would be impossible, in fact, for Georgia to move forward without it.
60% of adults to be immunized by 2021. This is about 1.7 million citizens. Georgia's government calls this plan an ambitious plan. How that sounds to you?
Well, I think all good plans have to be ambitious, but just as important, this one is practical. It's practical in some very important ways. Number one, it identifies that priority set of groups. This is very similar to the plans that you've seen in other countries around the world, and it really reflects careful thinking about who is the most important group, who needs the vaccine the soonest. Another way that the plan is practical is that it sets out the regulatory and legal processes that are required. When countries negotiate contracts to provide vaccines, they have to think carefully about the legal environment, issues like indemnity, and being in line with national regulatory requirements. To anticipate these and take actions in advance saves time so that the country is not in a position where A, it has difficulty negotiating an agreement with the major manufacturers and loses out, or B, it manages to get the vaccine and then face legal hurdles here in Georgia at home. And I want to highlight a third one, which I think is extremely important, and that's the public information. There's a lot of information, misinformation out there in social media and elsewhere on the street. The way people are talking about vaccines, a lot of fears, a lot of concerns. So very, very important and practical that this national vaccination deployment plan include a public information effort.
Let me continue from there. What the recent polls show us is that 41% of population say that they say no to the vaccine. Another 17% says that they are hesitating. So did we need this plan in place to start this information campaign?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is really of utmost importance. And I would just add to the figures that you cited that I believe they also show a greater concern among women as well. So there's also a gender aspect to this. Very important that those efforts begin very soon and that they are multifaceted. I mean, people get their news from all sorts of platforms, both within Georgia and from other countries as well. I think media companies in Georgia also need to play a role. Community-based organizations, there needs to be real leadership on this. We don't want a situation where the country manages to put in place a great system for deploying vaccines, gets a hold of a supply, and then everybody is hesitant to take it.
Yes, and we already had this example with the Chinese vaccine. For example, nobody knew whether the Chinese vaccine would be effective or not, but the negative campaign was so that if now government needs to, for example, buy some of these vaccines, it will be probably totally impossible to do that for Georgia already. In this plan, you cannot read anything about public-private partnerships in this regards. Do you think that aspect should be in the plan as well?
Well, you mentioned the private sector, and I know that another issue that's hotly debated these days is whether there should be also commercial purchases.
Yes.
I think that this is actually a sensitive issue. There is a benefit to having a well-coordinated purchase and deployment of vaccines, and that's done in accordance with Georgia's national plan. That's very important, particularly at the outset. That said, I agree that the private sector also needs to play an important role. You see that there's an opportunity for companies to share information, proper information, scientifically based information with their employees, to be flexible and safe in their own work practices, to ensure that people are able to go and get vaccinated.
Since you mentioned the scientific information, we have this case nowadays globally, for example, with the Russian vaccine, when a very prominent scientific journal has talked about Lancet, talked about the effectiveness of vaccine, but nobody in the world believes that this is true. So there are some sensitivities there as well. By the way, what do you think of Russian vaccine? Should Georgia think of it at all?
I think each country has its own dynamics, and I won't comment on the Russian vaccine or any other particular vaccine. What I will say is that ADB has a facility to help countries purchase vaccines, and we require that vaccines that are financed with this are approved by a stringent regulatory authority.
Back to the plan and execution of plans, since you mentioned one thing is to have a very good plan, but another is to put this plan in place. When you look at the ambitious goal of the government, when the mass immunization starts, there will be quite a lot of people that need to be vaccinated. Do you see challenges in execution of the plan?
Look, definitely this is a challenge, as it is for almost every country around the world. Something that Georgia really has going for it is its strong institutions. It has a system for immunization. This has to be expanded to allow for what is an unprecedented scale required to mobilize health workers and others to be able to do this on a mass scale. It's a big challenge. The government knows that, and it's already beginning to prepare. And something we haven't talked about is that this is not a one-time event. What the scientists tell us is that even with the vaccination, the effect is limited in time. So setting this up and getting it right in terms of the public information is so important, because it will set the tone for what is going to be a longer-term undertaking.
Is it realistic that we will have more diverse sources by the second and third quarters of 2021? Because this seems like the basis what this plan depends on.
There are so many of these vaccines that are already receiving regulatory approval, and even more that are in the second and third stage trials and will come onto the market later this year or next year. There are going to be easier ways to administer vaccines, according to what I read about some of the ones that may be released even as early as next year. One shot instead of two. There's even talk about administering via oral drops instead of a shot. I'm not a doctor or a scientist.
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I'm interested in what is ADB's stance or recommendation in that regard. Do you think Georgian government should be in talks with, for example, Johnson & Johnson or any other that the world bets that this could be a very reliable source of diversification right now in talks with these manufacturers.
What I know is that governments around the world are doing all that they can to get a hold of vaccines. And of course, they're not just talking to one manufacturer. There will have to be a diverse supply. And again, there's the immediate term, and then there's the longer term. So governments also have to plan for the longer term, and they're going to need to look at different factors, including the cost and ease of administration, and of course the safety of different vaccines and how they will be perceived by the population. Something that we talked about earlier, very important in Georgia.
What example is Israel for the world? I was looking at the figures just yesterday, and as of February 7, you can see that 24% of the population has already taken 2 jabs, which means that they are fully vaccinated already.
I think there are a few interesting examples that your viewers may want to look up. One is Israel, which has been successful in getting an early supply. Again, there's not a lot of transparency about how much government's paying for these vaccines, but some of them are reported to be quite expensive. They have managed to immunize a very large portion of their population already. There's an interesting comparison to be made between the experience of Canada and Australia, and a lot's been written about this recently. These countries are not yet rolling out in a large scale their own vaccination programs. I raise these examples because it will show that even developed countries are having challenges in getting access to reliable supplies, in avoiding a gap between public expectations and the reality of what those health systems can actually roll out and when. And that's why vaccination is a politically sensitive topic, not just in Georgia, but around the world. Public information, again, very, very important.
Should we call this document a plan or more of a strategy? And let me explain what I mean here. Because in this document, I cannot see any timetable. I cannot see like monitoring indicators, set of responsibilities. I mean, everything that would make a plan a plan. I understand that uncertainties, and we've just mentioned so many in this short period of time, are a lot. But is this actually a plan?
It is, and it's appropriate that there are blanks, if you like, gaps in the plan. It's a living document and has to be for 2 reasons. One, there is imperfect information right now. We don't know yet which vaccines the government is going to get access to. So what has it done? It's done an in-depth assessment of 9 of the top vaccines, just to make sure that it can tailor its plan to whichever one it gets. And I think once that's known in more detail, then it's going to be able to fill in the details. So that's very important. The second reason that the plan has to be flexible and what I would call a living plan, subject to updates, is that there are these uncertainties that we talked about a little earlier, how the disease is adapting. We're seeing new strains. There may be new ways of reaching people. So there has to be some flexibility in the plan. So I think it's appropriate in that regard.
Hey guys, stay tuned, subscribe, and follow us on BMG.